10 innocent bystanders killed, 15 others injured. The murder weapon, a rental van. It happened just hours ago when this street became the scene of sudden panic and deadly destruction.
It's a horrific scene. It's something I don't think anybody can be prepared for.
At about 1:30 p.m., a white van jumped the curb and plowed into a number of pedestrians before speeding away. First responders treated victims on the blood-stained sidewalk, and 10 patients were taken to the city's major trauma center at Sunnybrook Hospital. The emergency department under lockdown as a safety precaution because no one really knew the nature of the attack. It happened near the corner of Yonge and Finch in the city's north end. Police apprehended the white van south of the crash site and arrested the sole occupant in a dramatic confrontation. The name of the alleged driver is Alek Minassian. He's a 25-year-old from Richmond Hill, Ontario, north of Toronto. His LinkedIn profile says he's a student at Seneca College. The government says the suspect is not associated with any threat to national security. As witnesses took in the terrible chain of events, their faces were etched with the grief and horror. CBC News has learned a lot more about the suspect. More on that in a moment, but first, Joanna Remiliotis takes us through what happened.
The horror of the aftermath is in the details. The discarded paramedic gloves, the bodies still lying on the pavement. Kenneth Wu saw the van strike a woman, then locked eyes with the man behind the wheel.
Because he was looking at me, and then he saw that old lady, and he turned left a little bit to hit the lady on the sidewalk, and then he started driving down. As soon as he passed my car, he turned around, he looked at me face to face. That's when I saw he was a very angry and scared young guy.
Wu says the van braked, then sped off again, driving on the sidewalk for several more blocks, hitting one pedestrian after another. Kasra Ibrahimi watched in shock.
I saw the van, it was a white van. As I remember, it was exactly on the sideway. And when it gets to place, looks like a movie. It hits the pillar and he will like fly. Things like that. It was super scary, yeah.
Nana Agyeman Badu rushed to help a woman who tried to jump out of the way.
And the lady was coming north beside the bar shelter, and she saw the car coming, and she tried to stand aside, but she was not lucky. She got pinned into the bar shelter, the grass, and she was pushed backwards, lying down with all the glasses on top of her, broken glasses on top of her with cuts.
The terror continued for several more blocks. Witnesses saw a baby stroller fly into the air, saw the van plow into a group of people before finally stopping.
I saw the light, I don't know, how can I say it, the car seat from a baby going up like that. I don't know if the baby hitting or not. Hopefully the baby was fine.
After a dramatic police standoff, the man was arrested at the scene.
This is going to be a long investigation with multiple witnesses, with a lot of surveillance cameras.
Hours later, dozens of officers and the coroner were still here, assessing the carnage. The victims still here too. And people continue to line the streets. Colin Gervais lives around the corner.
I came out here to just pay my respects to these people because it could have been me easily this morning. It could have been me if I hadn't had a doctor's appointment today. If my schedule had been slightly different, it might have been me walking in front of here.
I couldn't believe that it was at basically our doorstep. It made me really nervous and sad to think that a lot of families have lost their loved one, or they didn't know where they were and they couldn't situate them. So I'm just glad that we're safe, but yeah, our hearts are with all of the families who lost somebody today.
And Joanna is here with us now. The police chief speaking this evening. What's the latest for him?
Well, the crime scene is still an active one, and it's a big one. It stretches out almost a kilometer down that way. And we spoke to a couple of officers on the scene. They're going to be here for at least a couple of days. And police are pleading with the public to send in anything that they have, any pieces, snippets of video, any eyewitness accounts, because they literally do want to piece this and construct this timeline as accurately as possible.
The question, of course, so many had as soon as this happened, and still do tonight, is motive. What do we know about that?
They're not speaking specifically about motive. They're not ruling anything out yet, but here's what the Toronto's police chief had to say about motive.
We're all putting our pieces together to see exactly what we have. And at this particular point in time, there's nothing that does affect the national security footprint. We are looking very strongly to what the exact motive or motivation was for this particular incident to take place. And at the end of the day, we will have a fulsome answer and we'll have a fulsome account as to what the conclusion of this is.
I will just say to people that I hope
that they will understand, as I know they do, people who live in the city, who have come to the city from around the world. This kind of tragic incident is not representative of how we live or who we are or anything to do with life in the city on a day-to-day basis. And that I hope people will reflect on that, will reaffirm that, will go to work tomorrow and perhaps offer, as sometimes is the case in churches, a sign of peace to each other, just in some small way, to acknowledge that we're going to carry on with heavy hearts, but that we're going to carry on with a life that is admired around the world, and that we will do that in the way that Torontonians do things.
People across the country are thinking about what's happening here in Toronto and are thinking about the families and the victims. So I just want to again thank everyone who has been so ready to support and to encourage anyone who has information, as the mayor and the chief have said, to come forward. So reassuring words from Ontario's premier and Toronto's mayor, but this investigation, it will take a long time, and for sure there'll be more to hear about tomorrow.
Okay, Joanna, thank you very much.
Welcome.
So as we've heard, officials saying there is no national security threat, at least none that they have found, but CBC News has learned more about the suspect in custody, Alek Minassian. Here's what may have motivated him. Our senior investigative correspondent, Diana Swain, has been looking into that angle. And Diana, what have you learned?
Well, as you said, there's no indication so far that authorities had that this was motivated by terrorism or by political views. Why then? So here's what we've learned so far about the man behind the wheel and what might have motivated him to do this. This cell phone video shows the driver as he steps out of the van into the line of a police officer who has his weapon drawn. That driver has now been identified as 25-year-old Alek Minassian. Watch as he gestures, appearing to try to provoke the Toronto police officer into firing on him. And listen as he yells at the officer to shoot him. Tonight, Minassian is in custody. As police search for a motive, one possible explanation is circulating online, suggesting Minassian was angry over being rebuffed by women. In what appears to be a post on Facebook, in which a man with the same name and picture as Minassian refers to the Supreme Gentleman, Elliot Rodger.
Hi, Elliot Rodger here.
In fact, Rodger was responsible for a deadly rampage in Isla Vista, California in 2014, killing 6 people and injuring over a dozen more.
Tomorrow is the day of retribution. The day in which I will have my revenge against humanity.
A video Rodger posted just beforehand raged about successive women turning down his advances.
Well, because girls have never been attracted to me.
In that video, men who always seemed to win with women were referred to as Chads, Stacys, the women who turned men down, rendering those like Rodger incels or involuntarily celibate. This posting, apparently from Minassian, says the incel rebellion has already begun. We will overthrow all the Chads and Stacys. CBC News has not been able to independently verify the post as being made by Minassian. There is no indication so far that he targeted any specific person as he plowed down the sidewalk, but rather aimed his vehicle at anyone in his path.
So, Dan, a lot to digest there. Tell us more about what you know in this case.
There's not a whole lot more about him on social media, Ian. What we did find was his LinkedIn profile, in which it says he's a Seneca College student. That's a college here in Toronto. He appears to have been a student there for some time. It says from 2011 to present day, so we're talking 7 years. It seems he was developing an app that would help you find free parking spots in Toronto. Beyond that, based on the footage, we don't believe he was seriously injured in any way as he was taken into custody.
All right, Diana Swain, thank you.
As Diana mentioned there in her piece, a group name that you've probably never heard of before, incels or involuntary celibate. Their brand of conversation has been banned from websites like Reddit, and whether Minassian really does count himself amongst those so-called incels isn't confirmed, but what does it mean anyway to brand yourself as one? Ishmael Darrow is a journalist with BuzzFeed who's dug into some of this. Good to see you. So what is this group of people, if you were going to break it down for us?
Well, it's in the name, right? It's involuntarily celibate. These are young people, mostly men, who feel that they have been forced into celibacy, that they haven't had success with women in romantic and sexual relationships. And over time, that can really curdle into some really
resentful sentiments about women in general.
And does it, or has it, I guess it has, but does it normally take the form of violence?
Well, I think that for a lot of people, these terms, there's a heavy layer of irony. So it's not uncommon for somebody to, between relationships, maybe to jokingly say, I'm involuntarily celibate. But for people within communities where they very seriously self-identify as that, it is a little more barbed, and there's often very strong anti-woman and anti-feminist language where these young men often feel like they are owed relationships and they're owed sex, and when that doesn't happen, they can get quite angry.
So would you say it's a subgroup sort of marginalized young people, or is it something slightly more dangerous and nefarious?
Well, I think it's impossible to take this out of the larger world of online communities where often young men, they might join and not really have their identities totally molded yet. But over time, you see this on communities like Reddit or 4chan. Posting enough and finding this community, it can actually maybe radicalize you further than you even realized when you first joined this group, where you might only have wanted to post some memes or trade some jokes with other young men.
You use the word radicalize, which is an interesting choice of words here, and I wonder, is there chatter tonight about this incident? Is there someone claiming responsibility or the group celebrating in some way?
I think it's still very early and probably too early to say, but I wouldn't be surprised if on some of these darker corners of the web where a certain kind of reactionary politics has developed in the last few years, if you were to look tonight, I think you might see you might see some sympathy. Again, it's very early to say, but I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes an icon, sort of like Elliot Rodger became to the same community.
And again, we have not confirmed that this association is there on those web pages that Diana mentioned. Would it surprise you to see that it was, or is this maybe more common than we think?
I think, again, it's too early, but the fact that this post that we're talking about did specifically cite Elliot Rodger, who has become a bit of a strange martyr figure in certain parts of the web, I think you can't see that connection.
Okay. Ishmael Darrow, thanks for helping us understand something none of us really knew about until today. Thanks. Federal security officials and leaders from all levels of government are keeping a close eye on the Toronto situation. Katie Simpson has more on the security threat in this country. Canada's public safety minister is being careful with his words, saying it is irresponsible to speculate.
There would appear to be no national security connection to this particular incident.
Ralph Goodale happened to be in Toronto today to host a meeting of public safety and security ministers from G7 countries. He says the incident is unrelated to the meetings, and there's no need to raise Canada's national security threat level.
I think it's important to state this. There is no information available to me at the present time that would lead us to conclude that there should be a change in risk level.
That threat level sits at medium, which is where it has been since the 2014 shooting on Parliament Hill. After that attack, major public events across the country, including Canada Day celebrations, now involve intense visible security. That level hasn't changed, even after high-profile incidents like the U-Haul attack in Edmonton, the thwarted ISIS attack in Strathroy, Ontario, and the mosque shooting in Quebec City.
Our thoughts are obviously with those affected by this incident. We're still gathering information, and as soon as we can, we will share more information with Canadians.
The Prime Minister and national security agencies are monitoring the situation and cooperating with Toronto Police as it leads this investigation. The RCMP will only take over the case if it is a national security incident. We are all unsettled and very disturbed by a situation like this. I think it's impossible not to be. It's frightening. Tomorrow's G7 national security and public safety meetings will go ahead as planned. And while this incident is not a national security investigation, it certainly will be discussed among these allies. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Toronto. The Prime Minister has released a statement in response to the attack that happened this afternoon. It says, in part, on behalf of all Canadians, I offer my heartfelt condolences to the loved ones of those who were killed, and my thoughts for a fast and full recovery to those injured. I thank the first responders at the scene who managed this extremely difficult situation with courage and professionalism. He adds, of course, that they are and continue to watch the situation closely.
Very clear, just from a general perspective, to say that the actions definitely look deliberate.
The latest from police as they investigate today's deadly van attack in North Toronto that left 10 people dead. Police believe it was likely intentional, but what they're still trying to figure out Motive. What the driver was thinking. The suspect, 25-year-old Alek Minassian. Before today, he wasn't on police's radar, and so far, officials say there's no sign he's connected to any terrorist organization. Tonight, of course, there are many questions about the suspect, but what likely matters most to the injured victims and their families right now is recovery. 10 of them were transported to Toronto's Sunnybrook Hospital, not too far from the scene of the attack, and that's where CBC's Natalie Collada is standing by. So, Natalie, you've been there for a few hours now. Describe the scene for us. What's been happening there?
Well, Andrew, it's perhaps not altogether surprising when you're outside a hospital to see worried family members running in to the ER, but that is what we have been seeing over the last little while, as we know people inside, hospital officials as well as police, try and track down the family members of those inside who are being treated. We know that inside it was an emotional place. We spoke to one man who said he knew at one point that there were individuals who did not make it, who had died, that had passed away, that were in the ER. Here's what he had to say. Take a listen.
You could tell that they pulled the curtains around her after it. The whole team was in there working on it. But it was very, very sad. So much going on. And that they were all, the doctors and the interns were all so cool about it was what was amazing.
And of course, detectives that we have been speaking to have told us they have been trying their best to communicate with those individuals inside who were victims of this attack, who can communicate, trying, of course, to get as much information as they can as they continue in their investigation. We know that there is a lot to go through. We had the opportunity as well to speak to an acting supervising individual who works with the paramedics, the EMS services, to talk a little bit about what he saw on the scene coming out of the hospital here after he had been here. Here's what he had to say. Take a look.
Young and Finch all the way down to Young and Shepherd, just pure carnage. Debris everywhere. This areas of, I can't really describe it. There's just victims everywhere.
Now, earlier in the evening, we were told that of the 10 people that were brought here to hospital, 2 arrived with what they call vital signs absent and were pronounced dead. 5 were at the time reported in critical injury, critical condition. 3 with serious condition, but that, of course, is expected to evolve as the night progresses. Andrew.
All right, Natalie Collada outside Toronto's Sunnybrook Hospital. Thanks very much. Now let's turn back to Ian, because as is often the case when we're talking about survivors of a violent attack, the hours and the days to come can be a difficult time. Something, Ian, you could also say is true for the whole city.
That's right, Andrew. The city certainly pulling together tonight. Take a look at this shot of the Toronto skyline, the CN Tower, dark tonight in the wake of the attack. From a distance, Toronto looks just the same as always. It felt that way taking the subway northward to this scene, but if you look closely, especially around here, a lot has changed. That reputation, a safe and welcoming place, in doubt for many tonight. The attack shocking so many people, and as David Common learned, it's shattering an illusion held by many residents that such a thing could never happen here.
With an air of excitement, Toronto's downtown would seem a world away. But the security clampdown tonight clearly illustrates the countermeasures to a threat. Layers of trucks blocking vehicles from getting near crowds of Leaf fans, and a much larger than usual police presence.
I feel a lot safer than I usually would, and because it's the Leaf, so I'm good. I'm coming here and I'm enjoying myself.
We're not going to let fear take over the day, so we're going to make sure we're going to go out there and have fun. Because at the end of the day, that's what the individual might want to take away from us, is that sense of freedom, but we're not going to let that take over. So we're going to enjoy the day over here. Words can't even describe on how awful this tragic event is, but if you look around, this is what brings everyone together. So as one, we're going to unite, and like I said, we'll continue to be strong.
Tonight's security tightening is actually round 2, because less than a month ago, Toronto police announced that they were going to be clamping down on security around big events, even blocking people from parking underground unless they could prove they were residents. Security experts pointed to the threat of a vehicle being used as a weapon. the mayor back then alluded to it too.
It's 2018, and we've seen incidents happen, unfortunately, outside of sports venues and concert venues and so on around the world that would have caused us, as we did, we meaning the police, the security officials, and everybody else, to review security.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise if you're able to and remove your hats. The Leafs-Bruins game began tonight in silence. In a big city, an opportunity to remember those killed and a reminder of the danger that lurks.
And David is outside Toronto City Hall tonight, a popular place for tourists, but local residents too. And this attack clearly has rattled some nerves. And so what are people doing to counteract that uneasiness?
Well, Ian, you see that the landmark Toronto sign behind me is dimmed, but on porches, the lights are in fact very much on, particularly in that Yonge and Finch, Yonge and Sheppard area, the area of this city, the uptown, downtown where all of this took place. So many people unable to get home because traffic and transit was so complicated this evening. Some areas were shut down, and so those porch lights are on, indicating to people they are welcome to come into that house, to stay there if necessary, people opening their homes, opening their doors to help out one another on this, a day of tragedy in this city.
A gesture we've seen in other cities around the world. Thanks, David. As Toronto mourns, condolences have been coming in from around the world. British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, who's here in Toronto for the G7 meeting, wrote on Twitter, "Very sad to see the news of the incident in Toronto earlier today as I was visiting the city. My thoughts with those affected, their families and friends, and the emergency services personnel responding." And from the French President, Emmanuel Macron, his tweet translated from French reads, "I express my profound solidarity with the Canadian people."